It is my distinct pleasure and honor to introduce Ambassador Joseph DeTrani. Ambassador DeTrani is a former special envoy for six-party talks with North Korea and the U.S. representative to the Korea Energy Development Organization. He was an associate director of national intelligence and the mission manager for North Korea and the director of the National Counter-Proliferation Center and a senior advisor to the director of national intelligence. Ambassador DeTrani was the president of the Intelligence and National Security Alliance and the president of the Daniel Morgan Graduate School of National Security. He wrote a personal memoir about his 13-year experience of directly dealing with North Korean officials, recently published by the National Institute for Public Policy, entitled The North Korean Threat, Intelligence and Diplomacy. Ambassador has spoken before in the ICAS symposiums in fall 2013 and in winter 2015. Ambassador, welcome back to ICAS.
Well, thank you so much. That was very, very generous of you. It's an honor being here.
Nice, all yours.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you so much, Sangju.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
It's an honor being here. And let me just say, I'm looking forward to this discussion because I know many of you know more about North Korea than I. So I will learn a lot from this discussion. But let me just give you some of my views up front and then open it up for a dialogue between all of us. What I would like to do is spend about 15 to 20 minutes talking about the current situation in North Korea, what's happening now, starting with the 19 June 2024 visit of Vladimir Putin to the DPRK. I'd like to then move from what's happening now in North Korea, certainly since the six-party talks agreement, joint statement agreement on 19 September 2005, until, if you will, until where we are now, right now. That's the period I want to talk about, the current situation. But then I want to go back to 1994 in the agreed framework and sort of just talk about the dialogue we've had with North Korea for 30 years, a very significant dialogue, and just reminisce a little about the sort of dialogue we had and what Kim Jong-un and his father Kim Jong-il and his grandfather Kim Il-sung were asking us to do in regards to a normal relationship with North Korea. And then I'd like to talk a little about the prospects for moving forward. And Sangju, you asked me some very good questions. Where are we now, and how is China looking at this relationship between North Korea and the Russian Federation? How should we and the Republic of Korea and Japan respond to this new strategic partnership, comprehensive strategic partnership between North Korea and the Russian Federation? So I want to address that. So let me just start from the beginning. And I'd like to take it from, if I may, from the six-party talks, the joint statement of September 19, 2005, because I think that was a very seminal joint statement that committed North Korea to complete, verifiable dismantlement of all their nuclear weapons and ongoing nuclear weapons programs. Very significant. In return for something. What was the something? Well, we know what it was. It was security assurances, economic development assistance, a dialogue for the provision of light water reactors for civilian nuclear energy purposes, something North Korea needs and continues to need, and also a path to normal relations with the United States, with the Republic of Korea, and with the government of Japan. So that's the seminal. So what's happened in these 19 years since 2005? Well, most recently, and I just mentioned, the 19 June 2024 visit of Vladimir Putin with Kim Jong-un. and their agreement to establish, similar to what they did in 1961 with their Friendship and Cooperation and Mutual Assistance Treaty of 1961, they've established a comprehensive joint partnership. Very, very significant. As Kim Jong-un said, we are now allies. These are his words. We are now allies with the Russian Federation. I might add, as a note, about a year and a half ago in Track 2 dialogue with some Russian counterparts, I mentioned that North Korea, based on their 1961 Friendship, Cooperation, Mutual Assistance Treaty, was an ally of the Russian Federation, and I was corrected. I was told, Mr. DeTrani, you don't understand. North Korea is not an ally of Russia. Well, now they are. And Kim Jong-un said it very clearly, and we all saw this very clearly. And what does this mean? Well, it means quite a bit. It means quite a bit. It means quite a bit for the Russian Federation. And we know from reporting, very extensive reporting, and I think very, very reliable reporting, that North Korea is providing Russia with artillery assistance, weaponry, and also with ballistic missiles for their war of aggression in Ukraine. This is not only pretty significant, it is very significant for Vladimir Putin. He has an ally now that's providing him with weaponry to persist with his war of aggression in Ukraine. And on the North Korea side, for Kim Jong-un, well, obviously he's going to be getting quite a bit, and he probably got some of that already with the successful satellite launch last year. And he will be getting more assistance from the Russian Federation on the nuclear programs, on their missile programs. So for Kim Jong-un, it's not bad. It's not bad. He's getting something in return. Certainly for Vladimir Putin, he's getting quite a bit. He has another partner in his axis of authoritarian states that will be working against the interests of the Republic of Korea, Japan, certainly the United States, and our allies and partners around the world. So this is very significant. So this is and also for Kim Jong-un, it further emboldens him. It makes it very clear that we have not been successful in containing North Korea. I mean, North Korea's reached out now to Vladimir Putin, and he's responded with their comprehensive strategic partnership, which is significant. And then walking this back a bit, we saw recently, and certainly in the UN Security Council, where Russia has vetoed the extension of the panel of experts to monitor the implementation of sanctions imposed on North Korea. That's very significant. China abstained, but as a member of the UN Security Council, of one of the 5 members, that veto did away with, if you will, the panel of experts. No longer will there be a panel to monitor the implementation of the sanctions imposed by the UN Security Council on North Korea for their violation of UN Security Council resolutions. So that's significant. More equally significant would be China and Russia not moving forward in the Security Council to impose sanctions, further sanctions on North Korea for their violation of Security Council resolutions. So in some ways, North Korea, with impunity, can just move forward with their nuclear tests, with their missile launches, and with no likelihood of the UN Security Council imposing further sanctions on North Korea for their violations of Security Council resolutions. So this is all very, very significant. But then let's look at their missile and nuclear programs. The missile programs, we all know, we all saw last year with the Hwasong 18, a 3-stage solid fuel intercontinental ballistic missile that could reach the whole of the United States. Not only are we talking about the Hwasong 18, we're talking about the Hwasong 17, 15. We're talking about intermediate range ballistic missiles, short range ballistic missiles, hypersonic missiles, submarine launch ballistic missiles, cruise missiles. Where did we stop? North Korea, certainly with Kim Jong-un, has raced forward with his his missile programs. And with the nuclear programs, 2017, we saw a thermonuclear test of a nuclear weapon, thermonuclear test, the 6th test of a nuclear weapon. The anticipation is that North Korea could have their 7th nuclear test at any time. At any time. So their missile programs, their nuclear programs have moved forward exponentially. And certainly since Kim Jong-un took over in December of 2011, he's been in a race to ensure that North Korea has the nuclear weapons. And now the nuclear weapons, they can touch the whole of the United States. That's a very significant development. And then it's also the rhetoric coming from Pyongyang, where they have a preemptive policy now, a first use policy. If there's an imminent or a perceived to be an imminent threat against the leadership in Pyongyang or command and control, they will use their nuclear weapons, tactical nuclear weapons. And we saw them talking about training with their tactical nuclear weapons. So this is significant. Not only the rhetoric coming out, but also making it very clear that the Republic of Korea and the United States are the principal enemies of North Korea. And that reunification is off, peaceful reunification is off the table with North Korea, making it very clear. And we saw what Kim Yo-jong, the sister of Kim Jong-un, did with the liaison office at Kaesong, demolishing it in public view. So for the last, since 19 September 2005, these past 19 years have seen significant developments in a very negative way, Again, that joint statement of 19 September 2005 did commit North Korea to complete verifiable denuclearization in return for all those deliverables. But in 2009, that ended when North Korea would not permit IAEA monitors to leave the Yongbyon facility to visit suspect non-declared sites, nuclear sites. And that was the beginning of that. And that sort of speaks to 19 years. But let's move this back to 30 years of negotiations since 1994. And I give a lot of credit to Ambassador Bob Gallucci and the team, and Kang Suk-ju and the team in Pyongyang. I think that the agreed framework, I think that was a seminal event. It stopped the Yongbyon facility. It stopped not only the Yongbyon facility, but two other facilities, two other facilities that were being built. It stopped those facilities from moving forward on that. And what was what sort of was the precursors to that? What motivated that during that time Kim Il-sung to move in that direction? Jimmy Carter, former President Jimmy Carter, was visiting, introduced to Kim Il-sung by Billy Graham. And this was, I applaud what former President Jimmy Carter did at that time. He heard from Kim Il-sung of the need and the desire to have a normal relationship with the United States. And that was sort of the basis for moving forward in Geneva to establish the agreed framework, which held in place until 2002. We were building 2 light water reactors at Kumho, as we all know, for civilian nuclear energy purposes. These were proliferation-proof light water reactors, and that was moving forward. And we were providing the heavy fuel oil until those reactors became operational. And in 2002, it ended with their clandestine highly enriched uranium program. That was the reality. That was the reality. But then what happens after that? Well, we have the U.S., we have President George W. Bush reaching out to Jiang Zemin and saying, look, we got to do something here. North Korea seemingly is moving forward. They said they would take 8,000 plus fuel rods that were in cooling ponds and reprocess them. And they made it very clear to us. So President George W. Bush to Jiang Zemin, it was our Secretary of State, Colin Powell, to his counterpart in Beijing at the beginning of the 6-party talks. And what did we hear in the 6-party talks that we heard in 1994 in Geneva? We want a normal relationship with the United States. This is North Korea telling the United States very clearly, We want a normal relationship with the United States. And with the six-party talks, and I was there in 2003, very clearly hearing from North Korea, we want a normal relationship with the United States. But they wanted it, and they still want it on their terms as a nuclear weapon state. Accept us the way you accepted Pakistan. And we can be a good friend of the United States. And this is a nuclear deterrent. We would never use it aggressively. We would never use it. It's for our defensive purposes. As you say, the United States, you have a nuclear deterrent. We aspire to having this nuclear deterrent and retaining it. And we said, no, we would not accept you as a nuclear weapon state. We're talking about, and that's how we got to the joint statement of 19 September 2005, where, if you will, the 5 countries, China, Russia, with South Korea, Japan, and the United States, came up with this agreement with North Korea for complete, verifiable dismantlement of all the nuclear weapons and the nuclear weapons, ongoing nuclear weapons programs, in return for those deliverables, security assurances, etc. But a path to what? Normal relations with the United States, with the Republic of Korea, with the government of Japan. Normal relations. And this, again, it ended in 2009, unfortunately, the six-party talks. But again, we saw this with former President Donald Trump in Singapore. I was the first bullet on that statement that they came out with, the joint statement with his meetings with Kim Jong-un, would be what? A transformation of a relationship with the United States, a normal relationship. But before we go to 2018 in Singapore, let's go back to 2000, even before the six-party talks in 2003. That was Madeleine Albright, former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, visiting Pyongyang and meeting with Kim Jong-il to talk about a normal relationship, establishing an interest section or liaison offices in our respective capital, very similar to what we did in 1975 with the People's Republic of China. We would establish these offices. And Marshal Joe visiting from Pyongyang, meeting with President Bill Clinton in the White House, talking about coming together and maybe having President Clinton visit Pyongyang, which he was considering, but given the election, etc., that never happened. So even that, we have 1994, we have 2000, we have the six-party talks in 2003 to 2009, and the message was always a normal relationship with the United States. And as I mentioned a second ago, in Singapore in 2018 with President Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, transformation of a relationship between the United States and the DPRK, a normal relationship. In return for what? The denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. No nuclear weapons in South Korea. We've always made that very clear. North Korea knew this very clearly since 1991 with George H.W. Bush, making it very clear to the world that nuclear weapons were not in South Korea. So it's always been there. It failed in Hanoi. It failed in Hanoi on the issue of the highly enriched uranium program that North Korea obviously wants to retain because they want to retain that nuclear weapons capability. So that was a period of time. But what was the message from North Korea? A normal relationship with the United States. And what would this give them? It was clear in our negotiations. I spent over 13 years negotiating with the North Koreans, and certainly for the 9 years of official negotiations, and then the 4 years of track 1.5s with their Vice Foreign Minister, Yoon Ho, Han Sung-ro, always hearing the same message: a normal relationship with the United States. It will give them international legitimacy. It would remove those sanctions. It will give them access to foreign direct investment. It would transform things. Some of the critics would say that was a threat to Kim Jong-un. Well, that wasn't articulated. We didn't hear that. The sense was he was pretty comfortable where he was in his position there. But he was talking about, if you will, Yongjin, economic development while retaining nuclear weapons and moving in that direction, but a normal relationship with the United States. So here we are in 2024. And I just mentioned a few minutes ago, and we're all so familiar with it. Not only did we see on the 19th of June, 2024, a visit of Vladimir Putin to Pyongyang, and now this comprehensive strategic partnership, very similar to the 1961 Friendship and Cooperation and Mutual Assistance Treaty. That significant, but just as the past 2 days, a major North Korean military delegation visiting Moscow. That relationship is being enhanced in a significant way. And it's giving Vladimir Putin more weaponry to persist with his war of aggression in Ukraine. It's further emboldening, if you will, Kim Jong-un in his position in North Korea and his threats to the Republic of Korea, to the region, and certainly to the global community, the international community, and with the prospects of a seventh nuclear test, with a preemptive first use policy. So what are some of the options for moving forward? Well, we know North Korea has always wanted a relationship with the United States and with the Republic of Korea and Japan. And I might add, with the joint statement of 19 September 2005, we had working groups that were working with, if you will, North Korea and Japan to move towards a normal relationship, with the Republic of Korea and North Korea to move towards reunification, peaceful reunification. So we had a lot of developments going on at that time. So we know that this is something that they've always wanted. And the impediment was in Hanoi, lifting sanctions subsequent to 2016, the biting sanctions. And Kim Jong-un thought he had a proposal for former President Donald Trump. We'll stop everything at our Yongbyon facility to include the uranium enrichment, light water reactor work on their light water reactor, etc. But we wanted the United States to move towards lifting those sanctions that were imposed. And we said, no. Former President Donald Trump said, no, you have to include those other sites. And we know, and Kim Jong-un knows exactly what we're all talking about, those other highly enriched uranium sites, to put everything on the table. So sanctions have always been a key element here. That's one of the tools we have in our toolkit, isn't it? Sanctions relief. It's not only talking about we'll meet you anytime, anywhere, but what are the prospects for moving with some deliverables? And obviously sanctions relief is always one of the main things. And also moving towards, if you will, a normal relationship with the United States and with the Republic of Korea and Japan. There's a lot of money involved in this. A lot of money that would go to, certainly between the government of Japan and North Korea with that. So there are some options here for re-engaging. But the key right now is, because the threat is exponential, and it's so visible now that there's partnership with the Russian Federation is there, and the sense that Kim Jong-un feels emboldened, maybe to do something like he did in 2010 with the Chung'an, killing 47 sailors, and so forth, something that would try to intimidate the Republic of Korea, something that would be unfortunate if he did, because there would be a response from the Yoon Suk-yeol government. And that's the element of escalation that we're talking about here. So right now, the issue for the United States and our allies in the Republic of Korea and Japan, it's enhancing deterrence. It's ensuring that the Washington Declaration is alive and well and further enhanced. And our joint military exercises are further enhanced. So the message is very clear to Kim Jong-un and to the Russian Federation and Vladimir Putin that don't do it. Don't press that trigger, because we're there and there will be response. And they've heard it from the United States. They've heard it very clearly from the United States. Do something untoward, use your nuclear weapons, or tactical or what have you, and it will be the end of the regime in North Korea. So they know that. But the off-ramp here is further enhancing deterrence. The Washington Declaration, the Camp David meetings between the US and South Korea and Japan, further enhancing that. But also saying, look, we're prepared to talk. We're prepared to talk about a normal relationship. Because I think we do know from 30 years of negotiating with North Korea, I don't think they want to be, and I think we'll open this up for discussion, I don't think they want to be embraced by a Russian Federation that's a pariah state that is perpetrating, that is persisting with its war of aggression in Ukraine. I don't think that's where they want to be. And I think that's the off-ramp. Offering them that off-ramp, and that's always been there on the table. And we saw that. And the response would be, we don't know what the response would be, but offering it and putting it out there. So we have some tools while we enhance our deterrence, ensuring that North Korea doesn't do anything untoward, anything that's provocative, trying to further intimidate the United States, South Korea, Japan, our allies and partners, enhancing that. But the off-ramp being, we're prepared to come back to negotiations and talk. So with that sort of talking about 30 years of negotiations, talking about what they've done since the 19th September 2005 joint statement, these 19 years of enhancing their nuclear and missile programs and all their other programs. We haven't even talked about cyber. We haven't talked about biological. We haven't talked about chemical. We haven't talked about what they're doing on the illicit side of the ledger. And we haven't even mentioned human rights. The 24 million people who are living, and over 40% of the population, based on the DPRK and United Nations reporting going back over 2 years ago, over 40% of the people are malnourished. Doing something for the people of North Korea. And we're seeing the tension now between the Republic of Korea and North Korea, with the balloons that are coming in from North Korea to South Korea, and with the broadcasts that are going into North Korea. And what we saw on the CMA, on the DMZ, the exchange of live fire on the DMZ. North Korea said this was accidental. Well, some of us don't believe it was accidental. Being provocative, trying to incite something. And again, as we saw in 2010, the Bach government was very, very, very cautious in responding and so forth. I'm not sure that would be the case now with the Yoon Suk-yeol government. So having put that all on the table, Song-Ju, you mentioned some, and I'll end on this. You asked me some very, very good questions before we got into this dialogue. And you said, what would the response be from Japan, the United States, and the Republic of Korea? And I think that is our response. Enhanced deterrence, ensuring we're there, don't do anything stupid to North Korea, but giving them that off-ramp to come back to negotiations with the United States. What about Russia? Well, Russia's very pleased. Vladimir Putin has to be very pleased right now. He's getting weaponry from North Korea. He's getting weaponry from North Korea to persist with his war of aggression in Ukraine. Kim Jong-un has to be a little concerned, if not a little more concerned, although he may feel emboldened now, where he said, "You haven't contained me. We've embraced the Russian Federation. Look where we are now, and you haven't deterred us in regards to, we're not going to use nuclear weapons. We're not suicidal, but look what we've done on our nuclear programs, with our missile programs. As you haven't deterred us on that." He may feel that way, but in his heart of hearts, if what we heard from Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, and even Kim Jong-un, a normal relationship with the United States, the Republic of Korea, and Japan, that is the goal. So I think he's a little in there, and I think he would respond to an overture from the United States. And for China, I don't subscribe to China sort of being very, very concerned about what's happening between North Korea and the Russian Federation. I think China's quite aware of what's going on there. I think they've probably been apprised of what's going on there. Are they getting 100% of the information? Probably not. because North Korea doesn't want to see themselves as a vassal state. But I think they're pleased with that. But I don't think China wants to see a nuclear North Korea. I don't think China wants to see conflict on the Korean Peninsula, as we saw with the, if you will, the Korean War, and the casualties were suffered by all, and indeed by the People's Republic of China, the so-called volunteers that came in. So I don't think they want to see conflict on the peninsula or conflict in the region, and a nuclear North Korea, or that could incite, if you will, a nuclear arms race in South Korea, pursuing their own nuclear weapons program, Japan pursuing their own nuclear weapon. I don't think that's where China wants to be on that, in that regard. So I think for Xi Jinping, although probably aware of what's going on and probably pleased that the U.S. is a little off guard and is a little sort of thrown to the ropes a bit on this, with this embrace of North Korea and the Russian Federation, I think they would probably want to see movement again in a different direction. So I think they would be supportive to some extent. And that's where we could also reach out to China, as they did in 2003, again with George W. Bush and Jiang Zemin and Colin Powell and his counterpart in Beijing, saying, look, get North Korea to come back to the table. And if they do come back to the table, stop, cease and desist with nuclear tests, cease and desist with missile launches, and we'll talk about the movement towards lifting certain sanctions, etc., and moving towards a more normal relationship. I will end on this. You asked me very good questions, Sangju. I've gone, I think, on beyond my 15, 20 minutes.
Okay, very good, Ambassador. That's a great delivery. Now, having said that, now it's Bruce Bennett out there. Bruce.
Yes, sir, I am.
Go ahead, Bruce, go ahead.
Thank you. We hear Kim Jong-un saying that he's going to exponentially increase the production of his nuclear weapons. He said he wanted to have 30 launchers of KN-25s that have 6 missiles each, all to be nuclear, which would be 180 nuclear warheads. Sounds like he's planning on building hundreds. Is that your sense as well?
No, Bruce, I couldn't agree with you more, Bruce. And I think we saw with this unsuccessful launch, missile launch, the likelihood that it was a multiple warhead launch, and that's what he would be getting from the Russian Federation. That unique insight, technical insight, scientific insight on how you merge your missiles, how you put multiple warheads on your missiles, and so forth. I couldn't agree with you more. You know, we're talking about 40 to 60 nuclear weapons in their arsenal. Bruce, you know this better than I. Some of the estimates go to 100 nuclear warheads and so forth. And so, yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think this is where Kim Jong-un is. Is he putting a marker down? Is he sort of saying this for effect? Well, if he's saying it for effect, he's having an effect, because we're seeing him moving in that direction. And I think Russia would be more than amenable in providing North Korea, Kim Jong-un, with that technical, scientific assistance so that they have more of the capability you talked about, Bruce.
Very good. Thank you. Joe Bosco. Go ahead, please. Unmute your button, Joe. Unmute your button, Joe.
How's that? Any better?
Okay, good. Good. Go ahead.
Joe, Mr. Ambassador, good to see you again.
Nice seeing you, Joe.
Thank you for your terrific insights on this unbelievable saga of the North Korea nuclear program. Given your intimate relationships with your counterparts and your negotiating partners over these years, I wonder if you could reflect on what happened in terms of their attitude toward the United States during the Trump administration, when he carried out his maximum pressure campaign, which had 3 components. One was the sanctions, which had already been in place, and he expanded them. Second was his unbelievable rhetoric of the destruction of the North Korean system if they were to get out of line. And the third, which I think has been underestimated, was his attack on the legitimacy of the regime on human rights. He gave 3 major speeches in Seoul at the UN and in his State of the Union, in which he described the horrors of that regime and more or less questioned its legitimacy to govern. From your dealings with the North Koreans, how did they react to those kinds of threats and fiery language? Were they intimidated? Were they, provoked? How did they react? And why did it change after Trump shifted his rhetoric and started having love letters with Kim and visits in Singapore and Hanoi? I just don't understand the dynamic of why they seem to be on a good track with the maximum pressure campaign, and then it all fell apart. Did China play a role in that?
No, Joe, these are very, very good questions. Joe, I stopped meeting with the North Koreans at the end of, it was October of 2016, the last track 1.5 with Vice Foreign Minister Han Sung-ro in Kuala Lumpur. So subsequent to October of 2016, I met with the Chinese and the Russians to talk about it, but not the North Koreans. So, but what I got from the Chinese and the Russians were that our former president Donald Trump had impact. I mean, when he talked about fire and fury, that resonated with Kim Jong-un. And, Kim Jong-un is not suicidal, and he doesn't want to see the end of his regime, right? The Kim family regime. So that had impact. And so I can't explain why, if you will, the former president, Donald Trump, moved from the fire and fury to the Singapore. But obviously, South Korea played a role in the visit with Kim Jong-un and coming back to the White House, as you know so well, Joe, and all of us coming back and sharing with President Donald Trump that, Kim Jong-un would like a dialogue with you. And then, surprisingly, unexpectedly, President Donald Trump saying, yeah, I'm prepared to have this dialogue. And that sort of moved in that direction. But the sense I had before that was, I think Kim Jong-un was concerned, not only the sanctions that were biting and so forth, but they were dealing with someone who was prepared to put, they kept talking about who has a bigger button and all that sort of, people may have smiled hearing that, but we're talking about nuclear weapons here. And I mentioned in my short presentation, North Korea is not suicidal. I think we all know that, and they know that element of vulnerability there. So they have to be very cautious in moving in that direction. So I think Kim Jong-un proposal to the visiting South Korean delegations, senior national security advisor, head of the NIS, was a pretty powerful one, saying I'd like to meet with the president, and would he be willing? I think he's probably surprised, as many of us were surprised, that the president said, yeah, I'm prepared to sit down with him. I mean, Kim Jong-un got what he wanted. He got the pressure off of him. And as you alluded to in your excellent questions, Joe, he got the pressure off of him, but also a path to international legitimacy. I mean, the whole world was seeing him. In fact, I think we all know some of those videos of his visits in Singapore were actually displayed to the North Korean people. I mean, these are the same North Korean people who were told that South Korea is, an agrarian society. They're poor, they're all malnourished, they can't feed their own people. And now they're showing pictures of Kim Jong-un in Singapore being treated as, as a very significant dignitary, head of state. So he did get that, and he got a lot. But his surprise, Joe, I know it's not part of your question, but his surprise in Hanoi, when Donald Trump said, you've got to give us more than, your plutonium programs. We know about that. We knew about that since 1994. It's your highly enriched uranium programs, and you got to be forthcoming with that. And that's when obviously everything fell apart. And that's when, what is it, 60 hours, 66 hours going back, that train ride back. I mean, I could imagine what Choi Soon-hee, the current foreign minister, and Lee Young-ho, the foreign minister at that time, must have felt sitting down with Kim Jong-un for 60 plus hours on a train ride back to Pyongyang, where he felt he probably, lost face and probably thought he had a deal. That wasn't a deal. And he was told. So Joe, I really can't say what the North Koreans felt, but my sense is, having dealt with them over the years, I think this is I think Kim Jong-un got the sense that they were dealing with someone who was very serious and was going to move forward very aggressively if pushed to the ropes on this. And I thought I thought in this case, I think Kim Jong-un was looking for an off-ramp, and that was his approach, if you will, to his South Korean visitors, senior visitors at that time, and the unexpected positive response from former President Donald Trump.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Bill Jasper, go ahead. Go ahead, Bill. Unmute your button.
Okay, yeah.
Go ahead.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Ambassador. Yeah, it's a really great discussion, historical discussion. Brings up so many questions, of course, that I want to just bring up a couple of them. One is, I've worked on these sanctions issues, it seems like all my life, right? I'm an economist. I try to look at how they're dealing internally in North Korea. How are they dealing with the sanctions? And I end up probably much more optimistic than you on the future here. Surely their nuclear weapons are growing and bad, all of that. But their economy, I like to split it in two pieces. The state economy, the old-fashioned Marxist economy, I think is atrophied over this whole period of developing nuclear weapons. Now, they haven't reformed in the way China did or Russia did, Soviet Union did, and they're suffering. They're continuing to suffer, right, as we speak. There are people that are very, very hungry. The exchange rate is dropping like a rock, even the last couple of weeks. What happens is, I think and dollars have infiltrated. So it's a dollarized economy, which means it sort of takes it puts the burden on the state. They can't pay wages. Everything is now more or less private, which is eating away at the state authority. But it's not done yet. About half the people are still paid by the state. So it's a very mixed up, troublesome economy that Kim Jong-un has to deal with. I tend to think that's much more troublesome to him than anything going on outside of North Korea. He's got to worry about people at the gates. So that's a way of looking into the sanctions issue, which, one thing a couple things you did not mention, you did mention a little bit, but the 2016-17 sanctions, where Russia and China really put a hammer on North Korea. On their trade. North Korea is more sanctioned than anybody else, even Russia now, right? So it really knocked Kim Jong-un for a blow with the trade restrictions. I was amazed that happened at the time, and that the UN could put on such severe sanctions on North Korea with Chinese and Russian acceptance of it. It just blew my mind that they would do that. I think they went overboard. I think all of us went overboard on them. We put on too tough of sanctions on the economy, and Russia and China started backing off. Oh, wait a minute. We didn't mean to kill North Korea. Well, a lot of people on our side want to kill North Korea. So we got into a long, now I think the sanctions are just a nightmare for everybody. They're just not working. And they really need to be changed. Really, really. I've thought that for a long time, but now it's just critical that somebody renegotiate those sanctions. Which is another point. In the last 4 years, there's been absolutely zero that I know of negotiations, even discussion with North Korea. There's been no diplomacy, even with Russia, not much diplomacy. China, there's plenty of diplomacy. With North Korea, there's no diplomacy in 4 years. How can we tolerate that? Our side, our State Department, oh, they won't answer the phone. Well, surely we have ways to dig in there and push negotiations. And I would argue the negotiations, so last week I put a paper out on this. I would argue in secret talks or very close talks with Russia, one important thing, Russia has not delivered any modern weaponry to North Korea. I mean, they really need air defense, right? North Korea does. China has still not given them anything, right? North Korea's conventional arms seem really, really weak compared even just to South Korea. So there's a lopsided situation here where Russia the other thing is North Korea has not done a nuclear test in 6, 7 years now? How many years? 2016. I'm losing my ability to.
Okay, Bill, what's your question?
So my question is, do you think Russia and China separately, I don't put them together, would separately entertain a deal that we would present that would give away some of the sanctions, drop some of the sanctions in return for very specific, harder sanctions on their nuclear program? I'm kind of convinced that Russia doesn't want North Korean nukes. I know China doesn't want them. So I'm thinking maybe the sanctions can be fine-tuned just to focus on nukes and lay off some of the regular economy. How do you think that would work?
So, Bill, thank you, Bill. There's a lot to unpack with your comments and excellent comments and your question. Let me just say, Lee Young-ho, the foreign minister at the time of the Hanoi summit, February 2019, made it very clear at his press conference that North Korea, as you correctly said, was talking about those sanctions imposed on 2016 and subsequent to 2016. Those were the binding sanctions, and you're absolutely right. North Korea was really affected by those sanctions, really very significant sanctions that both Russia and China approved in the UN Security Council on that. So there's no question those sanctions were binding and it meant a lot. I just don't think Russia. I think Russia is feeling good about that relationship with North Korea right now, because Russia, I use this term as a pariah state, given their war of aggression against Ukraine, and we see this now with the 75th anniversary of NATO meetings here in Washington D.C., where the NATO and the international community has come together not only to criticize Russia, but to further sanction Russia for what they're doing. So no, I don't think Russia would be overly amenable to much of a dialogue. To be honest, I think China would be. I think China has been asking us to show flexibility, and as you alluded to in your question and your comments, China was looking for more than "we'll meet you anytime, anywhere." Looking for some substance. We'll meet you to talk about sanctions relief, but something in return. I mean, I think what we've seen, you're right on the economy. Again, going back to Byung-jin, where he wants both the nuclear and the missile, and certainly, Bill, they haven't slowed down on the missile or their nuclear programs, although it's been over 6 years since the nuclear test. But look what they've done on their missile programs and so forth. I mean, they've just gone way overboard on that. And now being able to put satellites in orbit, working with the Russian Federation on that. So I just don't think they're going to expect much from Russia, or we should expect much from Russia, unless Vladimir Putin sort of, has some sort of an epiphany when he says, well, let's forget about recreating the Russian Empire, and let's go back to the reality of where we are now, and stop with this invasion of a sovereign state that gave up its nuclear weapons in 1994 for security assurances that certainly, as we heard often from the North Koreans, your security assurances are a piece of paper that you could rip up any time. But you're asking us to dismantle all nuclear weapons and nuclear weapons facilities. And that's millions and millions of dollars and years of work. It's not like a security assurance. So, yeah, I think there's a lot there, Bill. I think sanctions are part of the toolkit we have. I think you're absolutely right. Diplomacy has to kick in. We need more negotiations and so forth. And I do believe China would be amenable to some extent. Look, I mean, I think we all heard here, many of us have worked this issue for so many years. We've also heard here from the Chinese that, given the tension in the relationship with the People's Republic of China, don't expect us to do too much heavy lifting with North Korea. That's over to you. So you have to work on this relationship with the PRC, the United States, and maybe we should ease that tension in our relationship. And as we move towards a better relationship, maybe we could do some more, or some of the heavy lifting with North Korea. I think we're at that stage now, because we're talking about fentanyl. We're talking about AI. We're talking about a mill-to-mill dialogue. So I think we're at the stage now where North Korea should be put on the table. And I think China would pick up a bit on that. But I think the ball really is in our court. And this is where we have to do, indeed, the heavy lifting on that. Further to your comments, Bill.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. General Gregson out there? General Gregson?
I am, Sanju. Good to hear you.
Okay,
Thank you.
go ahead, General.
I finally got signed in. Ambassador DeTrani, what's your cut on this military delegation from North Korea visiting Russia? Is this merely performative art, or is this signal some kind of deeper cooperation, for example, as in deep tunnel construction, which we know the North Koreans are good at, which might be something useful on the front in Ukraine?
No, that's really good, General Gregson. Yeah, I was just talking to someone a few days ago, or just yesterday, in fact, about Hamas, and where Israel is saying it was the North Koreans that helped Hamas build those underground tunnels, and certainly North Korea is very expert at building underground tunnels and so forth. So yeah, I think this senior military delegation that's in or going to Moscow is very significant yet. I really do think it's significant. I think it's speaking to not only laborers that possibly would be going to Russia and bringing some revenue back to Pyongyang for their nuclear and missile programs, and also the well-being of their leadership. But I think it's also indicative of North Korea's willingness now, maybe given this comprehensive strategic partnership, this new partnership, where each will come to the aid of the other in time of conflict, where there may be that introduction of, and hopefully that never happens, but the introduction of military capabilities into the Russian Federation, into Russia, and hopefully we would never see something like that in Ukraine. But I mean, I think this is all on the table, and I think the trend lines are going in that direction, and that's where we really, I think further to Bill Brown's, I think we have to really be proactive in a way of saying, okay, let's put everything on the table. Let's tell North Korea they're moving in the wrong direction here, because they're indeed it's not going to be in their interest, and so forth. But I think this recent military delegation, Chip, as you alluded to in your question, is significant, and I think it speaks to a greater involvement of North Korea in the exploits of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Ambassador. Tom Kim, are you there? Tom, go ahead.
Good to hear again, Ambassador DeTrani, and thank you for doing this for us. And we've been watching North Korea for many years, and my question is, where do you think he's going to end up with? The North Korea is determined not to denuclearize, to keep up their nuclear weapons and never stop provocations. And South Korea is not doing anything. They do not talk to each other. And what do you think, other than deterrent in cooperation with the United States? And deterrent is good as long as it works, but it does not resolve nuclear issues at all. And my question is, where do you think it's going to end up with? How it's going to result in at the end? It's going to be, I just don't want no more insecure situation in Korea, and people can live peacefully together. But there's no signs of the improvement whatsoever, and I don't see anyone, South Korean government or the United States, is doing anything at all. What they should do that they are not doing now?
No, I think these are very good points you made, Tom Kim. Look, I don't disagree with you. I think this is a very precarious time. The possibility, some would say maybe the likelihood of stumbling into conflict on the Korean Peninsula, as we saw with the CMA and the live fire going between the North and South just a few weeks ago. I think that's all there, and things could escalate. That didn't escalate with the Chung'an in 2010, but I think if we had a repeat of that, it could escalate in the on the West Sea with the Northern Limit Lines, et cetera. So, or the DMZ now that CMA is off the table. I think all those pieces are in play. Yeah, I think obviously enhanced deterrence is key, because it's pretty it's not only provocative, but it's intimidating hearing what we're hearing from North Korea with the first use preemptive strike if there's an imminent or perceived to be an imminent threat and so forth. I mean, that is so, yeah, and enhanced deterrence, there's no question about that. But also that off-ramp, further to Bill's comments and so forth, of saying we're prepared to put the sanctions on the table, talk about sanctions lifting, but North Korea has to realize they got to stop, cease and desist with their nuclear tests, certainly not another seventh nuclear test, and stop and cease and desist with missile launches, whether it's ICBMs or hypersonics or cruise missiles, submarine launch ballistic missiles, etc. Now even merging their nuclear arsenal to these delivery systems. So, but eventually down the road, I think we need to stay with complete verifiable denuclearization. And this has been the rub with North Korea. Accept us as you accepted Pakistan as a nuclear weapon state, and we'll be good friends of the United States. Well, we're not going to, and we've explained that to North Korea. And I think the Eum-Hos and the Hunsing Rolls and even Chase, I think people we've negotiated with understood what we were saying about a nuclear arms race if we should accept North Korea as a nuclear weapon state. And also what we saw in Syria with North Korea. Starting in 1997, my goodness, we were providing heavy fuel oil and building 2 light water reactors with the agreed framework. And they were building a 5 megawatt graphite moderated reactor in Al-Kamar in Syria. I mean, so proliferation is a big issue here. So I think we should stay with it. It may take 5 years, it may take a decade or more, but as long as that is the goal, and North Korea sees deliverables in the interim, and they could work for the Bill's comments on their economy and give the people a better life, and hopefully we get some transparency on their, if you will, human rights situation, the gulags, transparency where they can close some of these facilities, these concentration camps, prison concentration camp, political concentration camps, and we can have monitors go in there. We can get some deliverables, but we can't do any of that unless we have a dialogue, unless there's communications, and that's where diplomacy has to kick in, and that's the piece that's missing from this equation. But I think there's a lot, or at least a number of tools we can put on the table that I think would be of interest to Kim Jong-un. But I think now we're not in such a good position as we were going back to 2018 in Singapore and even Hanoi in 2019. I mean, let's face it, the last 3.5 years we haven't talked to the North Koreans, and it's just gotten, and they've become more irascible with the Republic of Korea and the United States as the primary enemies, and so forth. So we have to do what's necessary to protect ourselves and our allies and partners, knowing that we will give Kim Jong-un that option of moving in a different direction. But we can only propose those things, Tong. I mean, Kim Jong-un has to sort of see the value in moving in a different direction. But again, after 30 years of negotiations with North Korea, and we heard from his grandfather, from his father, and now from Kim Jong-un, a normal relationship with the United States, and all of a sudden you're embracing this pariah state that's invaded, a sovereign nation that gave up its nuclear weapons in '94 for security assurances that you totally disregarded. I just don't see Kim Jong-un sort of going down that path, and I think we could. And I think this is where China could possibly do some of the heavy lifting. We have to do most of it, working with our allies in South Korea and Japan. This is where Kim Jong-un could probably sort of show some responsiveness. And what we would need, Tong, is we would need them to cease and desist with these provocations that are going on right now. And that's, some would say that's being too aspirational, but I think hope has to be part of, and obviously hope is not a strategy, but hope has to be part of our strategic view as we approach North Korea. Because stumbling into conflict on the Korean Peninsula, and again, coming to the anniversary of the armistice in July, we saw the consequences of war on the Korean Peninsula, and I don't think any of us want to be there, especially nuclear weapons.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. That's great. Chung-Soo Lee, please, are you there?
Yes, Dr. Kim,
Go ahead.
thank you.
Yeah.
In hearing about the North Korea's desire for normalization with the United States, that reminds me of the Soviet Union's desire to normalize their relationship with the United States, starting with Gorbachev, Yeltsin, and even Putin. And there's at one point that Putin turned against the United States. Simply, he lost faith in the United States when the United States insisted on Ukraine becoming a member of the NATO. And it seems to me that parallel thing is happening with Kim Jong-un, that he wanted normalization. And yet I heard, in fact, somebody said that he made a speech where he declared that I'm giving up on the United States. I just cannot trust the United States. And as a result, he's turning to Russia. And that also fits the global shift of power, seems to me, with the rise of BRICS, that the North Korea's approach to Russia is a part of the large schema that's going on among the BRICS. Isn't this a sign of a BRICS expanding with the possible North Korea joining that BRIC alliance?
Well, that's a very, very good question. Very good analysis, and I don't disagree with your analysis on that. I think to some extent, after Hanoi, but I think it's even beyond Hanoi. After Hanoi, I think to some extent Kim Jong-un said, we've tried, we've been pursuing it. He didn't get what he wanted in Hanoi, and maybe we were not And I'll be blunt, we were not as proactive, in my view, as we could have been to, even resurrect Hanoi, saying, okay, it didn't go well in Hanoi, but this is not Libya. We're not saying you have to give up everything, all your nuclear weapons before we could even talk to you. We're saying, and that was part of the joint statement of September 19, 2005, actions for actions, commitments for commitments. As you denuclearize, you start getting the deliverables, et cetera. So, I mean, there was a lot of room for, I think, negotiations during that period of time, and it didn't go. So, I think there is an extent that maybe he sort of gave up, and now he's embraced the Russian Federation. You talked about BRICS. You see the extra members or those who aspire to becoming members of BRICS. We talk about the Global South and so forth. Yeah, I mean, those as we speak, we have the President Modi of India in Moscow meeting with Putin. I think Putin is feeling feeling good about his relationship with North Korea. I think he's feeling, with the BRICS, and you mentioned BRICS, but I would even mention the Global South, where there's a little focus on that. And certainly the China is a big piece of this equation, though. I think China, China may be sort of saying, we're not embracing what Putin is doing necessarily with North Korea. And some of the reporting is that China is a little anxious. I sort of doubt that. I think China's pretty aware of what's going on there, and maybe want to be viewed as being somewhat anxious. But okay, but I don't think it's and Bill and others have mentioned, I don't think it's in China's interest to see North Korea with nuclear weapons or conflict on the Korean Peninsula and instability in Northeast Asia. That's not in their interest. So I think there is that piece that could be played, and we just have to do something with it. So, but I think your analysis, no, I don't disagree with your analysis on that. I think there is the good chance that Kim Jong-un probably did say that to some of his trusted advisors, that he gave up on the United States. But no, I don't think he would totally give up on the United States. I just don't. I mean, 30 years, gentlemen and ladies, we've been dealing with North Korea. And again, I even mentioned the Bill Clinton and Madeleine Albright and visits there. I don't subscribe to that. I don't think he's given up on that. I think in his heart of hearts, a lot of disappointment. I think he's further emboldening. He's showing the United States, look, you didn't succeed in containing us. Look, you didn't succeed in deterring us from building more nuclear weapons and more missile delivery systems. You didn't succeed. So it's sort of like in our face, you didn't succeed. But does that mean he's walking away from a normal relationship with the United States? No, I think that's still there. Because if he really is concerned about, and Bill, you mentioned that, concerned about the welfare of his people, over 40% malnourished, possibility of as we saw in the 90s, starvation, et cetera. I think he's aware that he's got to be not aligned with the pariah state to get that international legitimacy that's so necessary to make a difference for North Korea. And I would say for his legacy, his leadership, as he's preparing for a successor, whether it's his young daughter or not, who knows. But I think he's preparing that. And I think that this is the Kim family regime. This is what they're looking at. So thank you for your question. I think the analysis was very good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. David Lee, are you there?
Hi, yeah.
Go ahead, David.
Thank you, Ambassador, for being here. You've touched on this before, but I just wanted to ask, what do you imagine a point of no return where you determine that sanctions don't actually deter the actions of the North Korean, Chinese, or Russian governments? Given, for example, things like North Korean-Russian collaboration seemingly continuing unabated despite these hard sanctions. Obviously excluding something like outright war. Do you think there should be a point of no return that we consider?
David, I really think sanctions have a role to play, and I think as we talked about in 2016 and 2017 with the sanctions that China and Russia approved at the UN Security Council. They were so biting on North Korea, and so I do think, and obviously China and Russia are not supportive of any further sanctions on North Korea. And what we're hearing from Russia and China is stop using sanctions as a tool because it's not working. It's counterproductive. Let's move in a different direction. Well, I think there still needs to be something out there for consequences when you're in violation of all these Security Council resolutions. I mean, what's the point then? What are we doing as an international body? I think there needs to be some effort. Can we now that the panel of experts has been disbanded or will be disbanded, and China and Russia are not supportive of any further sanctions? Do sanctions have a role to play? I think symbolically they do. The Proliferation Security Initiative, where we bring all these countries together, I think that's still alive and well. Where we look at ensuring that North Korea doesn't traffic in weapons of mass destruction and they don't get further, I think that still has a role to play. So I do think sanctions have a role to play. Should it be the only tool in our toolkit? No. Obviously, diplomacy is there. The ability to lift those same sanctions are there. Getting foreign direct investment, getting the possibility of getting international liaison offices in our respective capitals, as we saw with Bill Clinton in 2000. I think these are all in play. And as we saw in September 19, 2005, joint statement of the six-party talks, I think they're all in play. I would not take anything off the table, though, regardless of what we're hearing from China and Russia about the negative effect of sanctions.
Thank you very much. Nobu Tanaka.
Thank you, Ambassador. Can you
Good.
hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay,
Thank
good.
you. Yes.
Thank you. A very, very interesting discussion. I'm not the North Korean specialist, but energy specialist. But I wonder that current situation of Ukraine is certainly has a significant impact on this North Korean situation because of, as you mentioned, about Putin's need to cope with North Korea. And that helps the Kim Jong-un's position significantly. So, in a way, international conflict in the Europe as well as in the Middle East, all of these things are very well connected to the behavior of Kim. So maybe I think Kim as a tail is just to try to wig the heads, but maybe. I think U.S. should solve the issue of the heads, like with Russia or with Middle East. Without clean solution, I think there's no way to convince Kim to give up the nuclear weapon and also to have a let's say normal relation with U.S. It's simply current global situation prevent the progress in the Korean Peninsula. What do you think about this?
No, I agree. I don't think there's any likelihood that North Korea is prepared to give up their nuclear weapons. And we've heard this very clearly from Kim Jong-un and the leadership around him that they're not going to give up their nuclear weapons. It doesn't mean, however, we shouldn't aspire. That should not be our goal, eventual goal and objective, to seek the complete, verifiable denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, if you will. Again, the Singapore joint statement, and going back to the six-party talks joint statement of September 2005. So although North Korea is adamant about retaining their nuclear weapons, the intermediate steps would be, and that's the path forward. I think we just discussed of sanctions relief, movement towards no more nuclear tests, no more missile launchers, and getting relief in that area. And while North Korea still has, whether it's 40 or 60 or 100 nuclear weapons and so forth, but our eventual goal down the road, and it could be 5, 10, 15, 20 years, we may never get there. But if we could stop what they're doing because it's the escalatory phase that has to be very concerning to all of us, right? And it's the possibility of stumbling into conflict. And we're talking about stumbling into conflict with not only tactical, but strategic nuclear weapons. And certainly Putin has put that on the table in his war of aggression in Ukraine. So yeah, I don't think it's likely from North Korea. I don't think we're ever going to see North Korea saying we're prepared to completely, verifiably denuclearize. But that doesn't mean it can't be our goal, our ultimate goal. But there are intermediate steps that will provide deliverables to North Korea that are in their interest. Security assurances, again, economic development assistance, path to normal, peaceful, if you will, light water reactors for civilian use, and a path to normal relations. My view is, I think North Korea, right from 2003, when I started negotiating with North Korea, I think their view was, and it still is, eventually we will cave. Eventually we will do what we did with Pakistan. Eventually the United States, with the Republic of Korea, with Japan, will eventually accept us. And we've stayed the course. We've said no, complete verifiable denuclearization and everything. But that doesn't mean there aren't so many intermediate steps that could be taken to de-escalate this tension, to move us in a different direction so we don't stumble into conflict.
Very good.
Thank you.
Richard White.
Thanks. So yeah, just a couple of short comments at the beginning. One, that it's true that Russia and North Korea move closer together, but I think that some of it was fortuitous. They were certainly moving in that direction. But I think a couple recent developments we discussed really accelerated that. The Ukraine war, North Korea's possession of large stocks that the Russians could quickly use. End of COVID, so North Korea was out of its isolation, both Russia and China looking for partners. But there's still some limits to it. I think in terms of conventional weaponry, the Russians are concerned about North Korean copying, for example. We've seen cases of the North Koreans knocking off Russian systems and selling them to others. And of course, fears of nuclear escalations. I think there are going to be limits to the cooperation. And finally, I think it's going to be transitory. I think, Russia is now ramping up its internal production. And so I think in a year or so, they're going to see a lot less need for North Korean assistance, or the war could end, or eventually Putin could leave. So we've got an immediate problem, and it's serious, but it may be solvable in the long term. And then with regard to China, I think whatever China's misgivings, they're not going to confront Russia on North Korea. They've always been very careful not to confront Russia on particular regional issues because of the importance of their overall global alignment. The question I had for you was related to the NATO summit and so on. Is there any role for the Europeans, NATO, the EU, individual European states in helping to breach this gap, perhaps as mediators, perhaps they're putting pressure on China to reinforce what the US and the East European allies or Eastern Asian allies are saying, and so on?
So Richard, very, very excellent comments. A lot to unpack on that, Richard. Look, no, I think there is a role. I think we see the Japan and South Korea with Australia and New Zealand at the NATO 75th anniversary celebrations here in Washington, D.C. I think there is a role. These are global issues, and I think and I'll just go back to one of the points you made, Richard. And I think Kim Jong-un is probably seeing what you just mentioned, the transactional aspect to Putin working with North Korea. That North Korea is of convenience right now, because they're providing the artillery shells, they're providing, if you will, the ballistic missiles and so forth. But eventually, like in 1961, and subsequent to that, they were and certainly in the 1990s, where they said the 1961 peace and friendship treaty with the North Korea wasn't really in play any longer. So I think Kim Jong-un realizes Putin could be using North Korea at this moment. So, and I think that further argues in the direction of more of a relationship with the United States, if it's certainly transactional. but I think it goes beyond that. I think it gets back to the point made a few minutes ago about the BRICS and the global South and others. I think Putin is looking for as many allies, if you will, partners, if you will, to confront the United States and our leadership role and so forth. So I'm not sure it's totally transactional. I think Kim Jong-un should be aware that he may be being used as the Russians did in the past. It could be transactional, but I do think I think Putin is looking beyond, the next year or two and so forth on conventional weapons. Look, even with the conventional weapons North Korea has at the Kaesung Heights now, the conventional weapons they have now, which are dated conventional weapons, they could still cause so much damage to Seoul within the first hour, the first 2 hours. We're talking about millions of people that could be killed, and so forth. So, yeah, on conventional weapons and nuclear, transactional, but I think NATO has a role here, and I think this is where South Korea, certainly South Korea, but Japan and Australia and New Zealand, they're looking at NATO, and NATO is probably trying to encourage South Korea maybe to provide that weaponry to Ukraine and further establish a relationship with the freedom fighters in Ukraine. So, but good points you made, Richard, and I don't disagree with many of the comments you made on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard and Joe. Larry Nix.
Yes.
Larry, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Sangju.
Okay.
I think the Russians view North Korean arms, frankly, in a longer term than I think you all have been alluding to. The Russians clearly expect, with the weapons flow from the US revived, the Russians expect another Ukrainian offensive next year, similar to what the Ukrainians tried to do in 2003. What Putin received, I think, in Pyongyang was assurances that those thousands upon thousands of artillery shells plus missiles would continue to be delivered from North Korea at least through the end of next year. Because if you look back to 2003, those North Korean artillery shells were vital to the in-depth Russian defenses that stalemated that Ukrainian offensive in 2003, which the Russians clearly will want to repeat, I think, in their view, next year. Also, what worries me in terms of this relationship now is that Putin has, and I think you alluded to this, Ambassador DeTrani, just a couple of minutes ago, Putin is looking for allies that can threaten the United States more directly. He sees Russian interest in having allies that can do that. So in terms of what Kim Jong-un may be thinking of, we talked about a nuclear test, but I think perhaps more likely would be for North Korea to fire off an intercontinental ballistic missile, not way up into the atmosphere and down in the Sea of Japan, which is what they almost always do, but to fire one way out into the Pacific, a lot closer to the United States, which would draw a real reaction here, including an emotional reaction to this demonstration of threats. Putin may well want to encourage that because Putin may believe that if the U.S. is threatened, the U.S. will be deterred from allowing Ukraine to use U.S. weapons to expand its own strikes deeper into Russia. And that's a big issue right now. that's being discussed at this NATO summit. President Biden has allowed a very limited range of U.S. weapons to be used to strike across the border into Russia, north of Kharkiv. But there's a lot of sentiment that this needs to be expanded. The U.S. needs to expand this to allow much deeper strikes by the Ukrainians using U.S. weapons. Putin may think, in fact, I think his mentality is very well along the lines of thinking, if I can orchestrate some of my allies to threaten the United States more directly, that will deter either President Biden or a President Trump from allowing Ukraine to use these U.S. weapons deeper inside of Russia. So Putin has, I think, a lot of at stake in this North Korean relationship right now.
Thank you, Larry.
And to what degree Kim Jong-un, well, in terms of the artillery shells, he's going to deliver those next year, tens of thousands of them to the Russian forces, especially if there's any sign that the Ukrainians are going to try to launch another offensive similar to 2003, which was a failure, by the way, partly due to the North Korean artillery shells.
So
Putin has a lot of incentive to get commitments from North Korea and also to stir up the North Koreans to threaten the United States more directly than they are right now.
So Larry, you made some very good points. Larry, I think it would be, Kim Jong-un would be foolish and foolish to do what you said Putin may encourage him to do, to launch a missile far into the Pacific to threaten the United States with an ICBM, whether it's a Hwasong-18 or another three-stage solid fuel mobile missile and so forth. You know, I go back to 1998 with the Taipodong 1 that flew over Japan, Bill Perry and Ash Carter coming out with their editorial in the New York Times saying if they should ever put something on a launch pad that looks like it's going to come towards the United States or an ally or a partner, we should tell them we're declaratory policy, we'll take it out while it's on a launch pad. Now, I think that would be, I think Kim Jong-un has to understand he shouldn't be a puppet of Putin. And Putin may encourage him to do things like that, but it would be putting North Korea in harm's way if they really try to further intimidate, indeed try to intimidate the United States or our allies in South Korea or Japan. I think that would be a terrible mistake, because I don't think anyone's going to tolerate that, and I think there will be consequences on that. So, but Larry, I think your point's right. I think Putin will push and try to get as much from North Korea as he could. I think he's going to use North Korea, and he's using it. It could be transactional. Hopefully Kim Jong-un sees this as a transactional thing. But I think in Putin's mind, he's got another so-called ally as part of his axis of authoritarian states who's going to oppose the United States and its leadership in the free world.
One thing I didn't mention that hasn't been mentioned in terms of what North Korea gets from the Russians: oil. You know, these reports of big Russian tankers knocking at the East Coast North Korean ports. North Korea's energy situation, I think, is a lot better now than it was when the UN sanctions were being relatively enforced. And the Russians right now are providing a lot more oil to North Korea, which is beneficial to their economy and to their conventional military.
No, those are very good points, Larry. I totally agree with that. Having said that, however, North Korea still depends on the People's Republic of China. I mean, we're talking about 90% of its trade, 90% of the crude oil, the petroleum products, we're always coming from China. But you're right, They're getting more from the Russian Federation now, to include some food aid, etc. But when we look at the long term, it's going to be China. Whether North Korea likes it or not, it's going to be the People's Republic of China that they're really dependent on for their. I hate to put it this way, but I'll put it this way: for their economic survival. It's the PRC. It's not the Russian Federation.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador. Ladies and gentlemen, time is up. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.